Hello again, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us here at the National Weather Service for Tuesday's Alaska's weather. I'm Dave Percy, a meteorologist with the National Weather Service, and I'll be hosting today's show. Up first, we've got winter storm warnings continuing until midnight tonight for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast. Winds gusting up to 50 miles an hour in areas with blowing snow, reducing visibilities to less than a half mile, in some cases less than a quarter mile, and in some rare cases down to whiteout conditions. And then back here to the west, we have a winter storm warning out for tonight here for the Ambler area, Kobuk Valley, back to the northwest there in the Noatak Valley area, away from the coastline, and that's for additional snow of 7 to 9 inches. Overnight tonight into early tomorrow. And then a winter storm warning out here for the greater Fairbanks area, Yukon Flats, eastward across the upper Tanana Valley, 40-mile country, right down to the Alaska Range here, and into the Denali Park area, Mount McKinley and those locations. And that's out actually through 6 p.m. on Wednesday, which is tomorrow. And again, 7 to 9 inches of snow. And in some cases, some areas in the mountainous terrain could get up to 16 inches with winds gusting to 40 miles an hour. Of course, that'll create some very low visibilities where you get those winds along with the new snow. And back here to the west and to the north there, that's a winter weather advisory out for these areas, Arctic Village down through the Bettles, Koyukuk Valley, into Tanana for snow and blowing snow with lesser amounts than in the warning areas, both on the wind and snow. Still some gusty winds. Visibilities could get down to less than a half a mile. Won't be as widespread or as serious as these warning areas here. And then here for the lower Yukon River Valley and the Yukon Delta, that's a winter weather advisory, and that's mainly due to periods of freezing rain. That'll continue tonight and into at least a portion of tomorrow here. And of course, that'll make conditions very slippery. So moving on to satellite imagery, we've got low pressure here drifting northward and the south to north flow coming up on the east side of a high pressure area here that's south of Kodiak Island. Now pulling warmer air up, and then it turns to the east here. Part of it pulls back to the west around the circulation of the main center, and some gets caught up in this westerly flow over the interior that's bringing surges of moisture eastward, has been for several days now. Same thing along the Arctic coast there. This one right through here, that's giving the gusty winds to the eastern Beaufort Sea coast north slope today. And the snow coming down kind of heavy, about 6 to 8 inches fell today in the McKinley area, and areas of snow occurring not that heavy, but across much of interior Alaska, again, kind of coming through as in impulses, picking up and then tapering off, kind of tapering off around Fairbanks today, for example, at least this afternoon, but that's due to pick up as more moisture rolls in tonight and tomorrow. Otherwise, just an increase of high clouds here south and east of the Alaska Range over south central Alaska down into Anchorage, to a lesser extent Prince William Sound, sunshine, Kodiak Island, and some loose clouds here along the Alaska Peninsula. Then you get into the rain out here over the central Aleutians on up to the Pribilofs, a couple tenths of an inch falling there at St. George. And wind's really not much of a factor at all with that system. And mostly sunny for the southeast coast, if not completely sunny, although it looks like some wisps of high clouds kind of skirting the area early on, associated with that band there. And you can see a lot of moisture here gathering still over the western interior, ready to move eastward. Some more back up along the Russian far east coast. It'll probably kick eastward as well over the next couple of days. For tonight, or for today, we've got an Arctic front up through here that's bringing the snow and blowing snow to the eastern Arctic coast and somewhat into the Brooks Range and North Slope, but additional amounts, pretty light. It's mostly just the winds affecting the area there. Kind of a break, scattered snow showers today over the eastern interior, but more solid precipitation back to the west. Freezing rain occurred over the Kuskokwim Delta, reported at Bethel earlier today, and then some scattered rain and snow showers in across central southern Kuskokwim Valley to the western slopes of the Alaska Range, but in deeper into this ridging over the southwest, you had dry conditions with some sunshine, Kodiak Island, Bristol Bay, and the Alaska Peninsula. Trough coming in with some showers, but nothing heavy for the Alaska Peninsula. And then this whole low complex creating some cloudy skies and rain for the Pribilofs with showers mostly north of the Aleutians today, a little bit farther south, some colder air, snow showers out toward Shemya. High pressure right over the Panhandle, light winds with mostly sunny skies today. And for tonight, not much change there. That high pulls back into British Columbia, retreating back to the west, but still ridging over the Panhandle, so you'll stay mostly clear. And with the light winds and kind of chilly temperatures overnight, but not too bad. And weak low here in the Gulf of Alaska, all the shower activity well to the south there with this trough coming over the top of this retreating ridge now that's just about completely off the map. Another Arctic high developing over the Russian Far East here, and that's going to drive this Arctic boundary southward and eastward. New low forms here just north of the Pribilofs. To the east of the front and southeast, rain becoming mixed, and then snow. Moderate to heavy at times here, and again with the warning advisories out over the interior. Improving on the Arctic coast, winds coming down, won't end completely, but will become lighter, and conditions will improve dramatically there as it shifts down to the southeast. And then the outlook for tomorrow, that boundary continues to sag southward here, and definitely as the Arctic jet comes southward, colder and drier, but afternoon sunshine pulling those temperatures back up in the afternoon here to the north and northwest. Still some blowing snow possibilities eastern Boulevard Sea coast, and some showers with that weak system moves into the Panhandle. Rain to the south, snow over the interior. Snow coming into northern Cook Inlet. Mananuska-Susitna Valley could see a couple 1 to 3, maybe 4 or 5 inches depending on where you are here along with that. Outlook for Thursday. Low takes off to the east. Another shot of cold air, especially up here over the North Slope and Arctic coast, remaining below zero all day long again, and colder temperatures into the western interior. Colder again for south central Alaska, but also back into the sunshine, but highs struggling to get above freezing. And this front brings some rain to the Aleutians and possibly the Pribilofs, and some snow up to St. Lawrence Island. Lows for tonight, either side of zero, North Slope and Arctic coast, to generally in the 30s above freezing here down in the Bering Sea and the Alaska Peninsula. 20s southern Alaska, 20s to lower 30s for the Panhandle, or lower 20s to lower 30s there. And then the highs tomorrow, either side of zero for the Arctic coast barely, and single numbers in the Brooks Range. 30s lower to mid here for the central interior, and mid to upper 30s south central Alaska. Upper 30s to mid 40s for the Panhandle, followed by lows much colder up here in the north. You can see below zero now into the Koyukuk Valley. Ambler 1 below for Yukon down near zero, with temperatures maybe as low as 25 below up over the North Slope, followed by highs staying below zero up in that area, and in the 20s in the central interior.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
We're getting flying weather. A lot of IFR here for Wednesday morning, sliding from the central Bering Sea into the central interior and extending over to the western Alaska Range. Marginal VFR on the increase here, Cook Inlet in the southern Susitna Valley, and eventually the Kenai Peninsula, but not tomorrow morning. IFR here off the coast, and IFR extending all the way back to the Amchitka Island area. And then for Wednesday afternoon, IFR for the entire Aleutian chain. It looks like Fox Islands, though, kind of in a narrow marginal VFR slot that extends up the Alaska Peninsula with IFR on the either coastline there. Marginal for Kodiak Island, and some lingering IFR actually on the east side of Kodiak up into Cook Inlet. Marginal VFR, and then IFR here either side of Cook Inlet in the Susitna Valley. IFR Copper River Basin, marginal VFR north of the Alaska Range and across the Tanana Valley, 40-mile country. Say cutting off right roughly around Eagle with some VFR to the north and the North Slope, Arctic coast, marginal. Panhandle, solid IFR. And solid IFR continues into Thursday morning here, as well as the Gulf of Alaska. IFR up the west side of the Kenai Peninsula, northern Cook Inlet, Mananuska Valley, and northern Copper River Basin. And also more IFR here along the Alaska Range westward across the Kuskokwim Valley and right out to the Delta, Bristol Bay IFR, Pribilof's IFR, and part of St. Lawrence Island IFR. Aleutians stay IFR. We've got VFR though, Kodiak Island, and the south coast of the Alaska Peninsula to about Unalaska Island, IFR up there in the North Slope. That really thins out on Thursday afternoon, just a narrow band now right along the Brooks Range with VFR breaking out on the Arctic coast. And more VFR, considerably better conditions for the afternoon here over interior Alaska. IFR holding over the Panhandle, although giving way for Lincoln on Glacier Bay to marginal conditions. Stays VFR for Kodiak Island again, up into now south central Alaska, mostly VFR, if not completely. And IFR, Bristol Bay, Yukon, or Kuskokwim Delta coast, up to the Bering Strait, covering much of the Bering Sea, but improving out west to VFR for Shimei and Attu. Passes tomorrow, IFR for Adigan, becoming marginal VFR. And we've got the same forecast out for Adigan, IFR, trending toward marginal in the afternoon. Lake Clark and Merrill, marginal VFR, lowest conditions. Likely at some point in the day there'll be IFR on the western approach of each pass. And that same pattern also for Rainy, marginal VFR, with IFR at some point in the day tomorrow, pretty likely on the western entrance. Windy, IFR improving to marginal as the afternoon wears on. And for Isabel, IFR, but better on the north side there, call it marginal. And for Mentasta, starting out VFR and then becoming IFR as a ton of moisture moves in. And then for Tanita, same thing, starting out VFR with IFR likely by midday through the afternoon into evening. And Portage, same trend, starting out with your with VFR, rapidly becoming conditions, visibilities deteriorating to IFR in the afternoon. Chilkoot and White, VFR to IFR as well. Freezing levels, 2,000 to 6,000 feet here over the northern Gulf of Alaska, 2,000 actually farther north here, south coast of the Norton Sound, with 6,000 feet, Cape Newenham, north of Kodiak, and taking a look at icing. We've got, with the moisture coming up, area, at least a small area here of considerable moderate rime icing. It's kind of shifting northeastward and eastward here with lighter icing threats here in the around that, and then kind of tapering off down toward the Alaska Peninsula. And another zone there over the southeast coast, not quite as significant as this one is. For the upper level wind flow chart, basically ridging aloft here in across the Panhandle. And we got the Arctic jet here cutting across the Brooks Range and North Slope, and the Pacific jet just catching the central Aleutians but staying well to the south. 9,000 feet, westerly flow, 10 to 20 knots here, west-northwest flow across the interior, and about 20 knots in the Panhandle, 20 knots Alaska Peninsula, light winds for the Aleutians, and 3,000 feet, much the same, higher pressure out over the west-central Bering Sea, 5 to 15 knot winds over the interior into the southeast coast. 20 knots Alaska Peninsula and probably the Barren Islands. That will translate into possible moderate turbulence in both areas.
Thanks for joining us for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider, and today I'm privileged to introduce Dr. Uccellini, the Director of the United States National Weather Service. Welcome back to Alaska, sir.
Thank you, Dave. Glad to be here.
Thanks. Prior to being the leader of the National Weather Service, your work included an extensive look at snowstorms across the northeastern United States. These are the types of storms that can bring some of the country's largest cities to its knees. Tell me a little bit about your fascination with snow.
Well, as far back as I can remember, I've always been interested in weather, growing up as a kid on Long Island, New York, and was particularly fascinated by snowstorms. Why they occurred, the distribution of snow was very varied across the entire region, the rain-snow line, all those things fascinated me right from the get-go. And I was interested in knowing how they worked, how the forecast worked, or more often than not didn't work one way or the other. And that drove me, that interest continued to build and drove me through high school right into college, wanting to be a meteorologist.
Okay, that's a fascinating story, and I think every meteorologist has a weather story like that in some way. Right. Due to Alaska's size and proximity to the North Pole, sometimes it's difficult to detect and analyze the weather patterns over Alaska. What's the National Weather Service doing to improve that weather detection?
Well, observations in this type of environment is a big challenge, whether it's from space or from what we call in situ observations from the ground or within the systems. Clearly, satellites have been playing an increasing role in providing the big picture, not only from a visual sense in what you see is occurring, but also from providing the data for numerical models that then are used to actually predict the weather. Alaska is actually pretty well positioned with respect to polar orbiting satellites, since you get a faster return of those satellites over your particular area. And in fact, the polar satellite system is the backbone for the observations that we use in our models, especially our global models, and they're particularly important for observing weather features that affect Alaska.
Alaskans live and die by the weather every day, and one of the strategic goals of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and the National Weather Service is to develop a more weather-ready nation. What does it mean for Alaskans to be weather-ready?
Well, the strategic outcome is based on people being ready, responsive, and therefore resilient to the increasing threats to extreme weather events. Those threats are related to not only the nature of the events, but the fact that we're becoming more vulnerable to them as we have more people, more infrastructure that could be affected by these events. So we have to ensure that the observations we make for situational awareness, the forecasts we make for people to take the proper responses, are connected to people's actions, the response to these events, so that they will be more resilient to what's facing them. You know, there are examples with respect to hurricanes. More people living along the coastline takes longer to evacuate. We have to make better forecasts with longer lead times, but we also have to communicate the threat so people will actually take action to avoid those storms. Up here you have, as in other parts of the United States, an increasing threat related to fire. As there are more people living in fire-prone areas, we have to ensure that our forecasts are good, that we don't have false alarms that make people not react to the forecast when in fact they should. But we also have to be able to communicate the threat and make sure that we're working with the partners in the emergency management community so that communities and right down to individuals will actually take the proper responses in the face of these events. So that's the strategic goal. There are a lot of challenges for us in terms of improving forecasts, but also improving our communication skills and linking with the emergency management communities that are actually out there trying to protect lives and mitigate property loss.
So a huge partnership effort going forward.
That's one of the important keys for the success of meeting the strategic goal.
Okay. One of the things you're talking about was understanding the weather information we're getting back from the computers, weather modeling, and you did a lot of work with that in some of your prior positions with the Environmental Prediction Center there, the National Center for Environmental Prediction. What can you tell us about recent improvements in that weather modeling? And you were using the polar orbiters as kind of a source of information that started that process.
Well, you know, first of all, we have to recognize that everything you see, you read and hear about weather, climate, or ocean forecasts are all driven by numerical models. Now, it really has been the revolution in our forecast process in the last part of the 20th century. The success of that numerical enterprise is based on three factors: big computers, global data, not just local data, but you have to have a global data set, and then the models themselves, the science that's behind the models and in running the models in an operational mode. So we're working to improve all three of those components. We upgraded our computers last year. We're going through another upgrade even as I speak. We'll be upgrading from 200 trillion calculations per second to 700 trillion calculations per second by January of 2015. This increase in the computer will allow us to run what we call Earth system models. It's not just the atmosphere, it's the atmosphere, ocean, ice, which is obviously very important up here, and land models that are all coupled together
Okay.
at higher resolution. So you need the big computers, you need the science that allows us to run these models and run them in a parallel mode, and that they're coupled so that the ocean effects could affect the atmosphere and vice versa, as an example. And then the global observations are absolutely critical, and over the last 20, 30 years they've become more dependent upon the satellite systems, and especially the polar orbiting satellites, which help drive the observations needed for those models, whether they be atmospheric observations, land, ice observations. We're deriving more and more of that from satellites now that feed into these models and produce forecasts with extended lead times. Now out, for extreme events especially, we're seeing much improved forecast out in the 4, 5, 6, 7, and even 8-day range, which gets us back to Weather Ready Nation, because if you're going to get ready for a storm event, you want those consistent forecasts approaching that event from day 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, so you can take the actions several days in advance that can help mitigate the property loss and protect your livelihood.
Okay, all part of the mission of protecting life and property. Dr. Uccellini, thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate it, and speaking to Alaskans and sharing how the National Weather Service is working for Alaska and the nation. Wish you safe travels around the 49th. Enjoy your time here, sir. And for Alaska Weather Facts, I'm meteorologist Dave Snider.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. Today's sea ice analysis. Continuing to show a trend back to the north, almost up getting north of St. Matthew Island there, just a little bit of thin ice left around that island. And the trend is winds kind of becoming light northerly, so you may see a slight southward drift here over the next day or so, and then it becomes kind of westerly or variable. And so really not much change here other than drifting around with the changing breezes for the next 5 days. Coastal water forecast, west winds 15 knots, very uniform wind pattern, and sea heights here for the coast. Out of the west 15, 5-foot seas, and east 15 on the north coast there with 6-foot seas. South 15 Lynn Canal, and with the central and southern inside waters, looking at a south breeze tomorrow at 10 knots with 3-foot seas. And then for Thursday, northwest 15 here for Lynn Canal. Otherwise, you could call this whole pattern here kind of variable, 15 or less for the inside waters, with seas running about 3 feet or so. West winds continue 15 knots, 6 to 7-foot seas along much of the coast. Extreme north coast, though, lighter, west at 10 with 6-foot seas. Prince William Sound, east at 10 or variable to east with slight seas, east 15 for the eastern North Gulf Coast, but small craft advisory due to westerly winds at 25 knots. That includes also the Barren Islands and Kamishak Bay. Southern Cook Inlet, small craft advisory southwest 25 with 7-foot seas. Swinging around to the northeast at 15 here, north of the Forelands. And then for Thursday, all of Cook Inlet, light north winds are variable to north at 10 knots, seas down to 2 to 3 feet. Northwest 25, so we still have small craft advisories for Kamishak Bay. And west 25 is good for small crafts for the Barren Islands. Otherwise, the North Gulf Coast looking at northwest at 15. Prince William Sound, variable to north at 10, seas remain slight. For Kodiak Island, west-southwest, 25 knots with 8 to 10-foot seas, 25-knot winds. Also in the forecast, small craft advisories, Alaska Peninsula, seas 8 feet. Southwest 20 for Bristol Bay with 3-foot seas. Look for westerlies at 15 there for Bristol Bay on Thursday. Otherwise, the Alaska Peninsula, west winds 20 knots. And 25-knot northwest winds here from Castle Cape right on up the east side of Kodiak Island. 25 knots with 7-foot seas. Shelikof Strait west at 20. Fox Island southwest 25 knots, seas 8 to 9 feet. Southwest 20 for Adak and Atka, and that extends out to Hamchitka. Then you get in small craft advisories here, southeast 25 from, say, Kiska out to Shimei and Attu. Those will increase to 40 knots out of the south here ahead of the next system, with seas building to 17 feet there for the area, really Kiska on out, and then 30 knots southwest, 25 southwest, so small craft advisory central Aleutians, Adak and Atka, and small craft advisories for the Fox Islands, south to southwest, 20 to 25 knots. And for the southwest coast, south of Nunivak Island, southwest 25 and 15-knot winds here out of the northwest of the Yukon Delta coast, north 10 to 15, Norton Sound, St. Lawrence Island, north 15, St. Matthew Island, southwest 25 for the Pribilofs, with seas up to 9 feet, just under 10 feet. And then for Thursday, northeast 15 there for Norton Sound, turning east across St. Lawrence Island. So light winds continue up there over the northern Bering. Small craft advisories, though, St. Matthew Island coming up 25 knots out of the south, southwest 25 for the Pribilofs, and then west 20 here for the Kuskokwim Delta coast. And up along the eastern Beaufort Sea, brisk wind advisories, strongest over to demarcation point, up to 30 knots there, falling back to northwest 20 on the central coast, northwest 15 on the west side, and from Cape Beaufort all the way down to Wales, northerlies, light 10 to 15. Then for the Thursday outlook, 15-knot northerlies here, Wales to Cape Thompson, and then 20 knots to Cape Beaufort. Then back down to 10 on the west side, light northerlies here at 15 for the central and eastern Beaufort Sea coast, except brisk wind advisories continue on the far eastern stretch of that coastline. For tonight, again, a lot of snow coming back in with winter storm warnings, winter weather advisories out for much of the interior here. And ending, though, for the Brooks Range, or for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast at midnight for the strong winds, as you can see the moisture and the winds shift southward and eastward. And then for tomorrow, this whole Arctic boundary comes south with snow into northern Cook Inlet, Anchorage, on up into the Sitnamanuska Valley, followed by clearing and colder on Thursday.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.